I think the Appalachian Trail is awesome. Like, there's no doubt about it. But, like, you're going to learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to learn a lot about trail culture. But how much are you really going to learn about the United States in this greater context? It's a form of escapism. And that's sometimes exactly what we need, is to escape what's going on outside of our front door. But for me personally, like, I needed to explore something a lot deeper than just myself and just the physical capabilities of something like that. So, I mean, I don't know what the benefit is, but I know that there is a benefit to stepping outside of our comfort zones and looking people in the eye. And I think it works both directions. I think that it makes those people feel more human. You know, when you're sleeping on the street in the middle of downtown LA, you can feel less and less like a human. And it makes you and me feel more human as well, and tap into this empathy that I think can go a really long way in this time in our society, and something that perhaps we're losing a little bit, and it's a good way to kind of gain it back a little.
That's Rickey Gates, this week on the Rich Roll Podcast.
The Rich Roll Podcast.
Greetings, bipedal humanoids. My name is Rich Roll. This is my podcast. Welcome or welcome back. Quick up top housekeeping. Just a few days remain until January 31st to take advantage of our special discount on the Plant Power Meal Planner. $20 off the annual $100 fee when you visit meals.richroll.com and enter promo code POWER20 at checkout. So if you've been waiting out this whole month, this is your final moment. My guest today is just a uniquely extraordinary human being. His name is Rickey Gates, and although you may have heard of him or know of him as an ultra runner, I would characterize him as much more of an artist, a conceptual artist that fuses endurance running and adventure with film, photography, and the written word to express a very distinct point of view that I would describe as humanist. After nearly a decade competing on the national and international mountain, trail, and ultra running circuits, Rickey took his love for ultra endurance, for storytelling, and for photography and essentially fused them together to create an ongoing series of project-based, essentially performance art runs that have included a run across America and the accompanying feature film called Transamericana that chronicles it. And the project he is perhaps best known for, Rickey ran every single street in San Francisco, a 1,300-mile undertaking that involved running 30 miles every day for 46 days, along the way logging 150,000 feet of elevation gain and meeting countless fascinating people along the way. That is all depicted in a short documentary produced by Salomon called Every Single Street, and I'll link that up in the show notes as well. In addition, Rickey hosts adventure running retreats called Run Bus Run and Hut Run Hut, which he will explain today, and has authored a new book about his transcontinental run entitled Cross Country, which comes out April 14th. I really love this guy. I got a whole lot more I want to tell you about Rickey before we get into it. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Health IQ. Do you eat a plant-based diet? Do you make time to exercise 4 or 5 times a week? That means you're putting in the effort to live a long life. Isn't it time to get financially rewarded for your commitment to a healthy lifestyle? The folks at Health IQ think so. Health IQ uses science and data to secure lower rates for people just like you on their life insurance. They can save you up to 41% because physically active people have significantly lower risks for heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. To see if you qualify, go to healthiq.com/richroll and take their Health IQ quiz. Depending upon your score, as well as other related qualifying factors, you can save up to 41% on your life insurance premiums compared to other providers. Again, go to healthiq.com/richroll. There's no commitment, and you'll learn even more about potential opportunities to be rewarded for your commitment to living healthy. One more time, that's healthiq, HEALTHIQ.com/richroll. Let's talk about mushrooms, because today's episode is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. It's no secret that these powerful superfoods are crazy rich in nutrients. Shrooms like lion's mane have long been used by Buddhist monks to help with focus during meditation and creativity. And chaga is overflowing with antioxidant properties that support your daily wellness, energy levels, and immune system. Four Sigmatic is the ultimate purveyor of mushroom blends, optimizing their potent powers in delicious beverages. From mushroom coffee to cordyceps elixirs and mushroom matcha with lion's mane, Four Sigmatic's fungi fuels are going to totally rock your world. And they taste really good. Everything at Four Sigmatic is made with only the highest quality adaptogens and can be easily taken on the go in convenient travel packs. All you need is hot water or your favorite nut milk to enjoy a deliciously healing mushroom concoction. Just go to foursigmatic.com/roll, use the discount code ROLL at checkout, and you'll get 15% off your purchase on every purchase, not just your first purchase, every purchase. That's foursigmatic.com/roll, discount code ROLL to get 15% off. And finally, we're brought to you today by Gravity Blankets. I am just delighted by this new sponsor because I'm somebody who has benefited tremendously from this product. I just can't tell you how excited I am about all of this. Some of you guys know I have a history of struggling with getting a solid night's sleep. And about a year ago, a friend gifted me one of these Gravity blankets. And I got to tell you, it was downright miraculous how much it helped me sleep, like a miracle from heaven. So what is it? Well, the Gravity blanket is basically a weighted blanket, the top rated weighted blanket, I might add, that helps you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer. I don't know what it is specifically, but there's something about the weight on top of you and tucked around you when you're in bed, sort of like being hugged, that just soothes my system. It decreases my production of stress hormones. It deepens my sleep. It allows me to awake in the morning restored, and I just love it. And basically what I'm saying is there is no more perfect product for me to endorse than the Gravity blanket. Its impact on my life has been immeasurable. The only blanket proven to improve sleep quality, Gravity blankets come in 15, 20, and 25-pound varieties, and they have a whole lineup of sleep products like weighted eye masks and travel blankets, all designed to give you a perfect night's rest. And they are affordable with their new lower price of $189, but listeners can get an extra 20% off. Here's how. Learn more at gravityblankets.com and use the promo code RICHROLL to get 20% off your purchase today. That's gravityblankets.com. Use code RICHROLL to get 20% off the blanket that everyone is talking about. All right, Rickey Gates. So as you will soon find out, Rickey is he's just a beautiful, thoughtful, creative, loving, and very present human with a deep appreciation for people, a profound curiosity about the world, and a poetic instinct for sharing his unique perspective. And today we cover it all, from his Run Every Street in San Francisco project to his Run Across America and all the stories and lessons that came out of those experiences. We talk about what fuels his passions, his devotion to a minimalist lifestyle, what it was like living in Antarctica, why he does what he does, and how he uses his talents to share a perspective and a vision for a better, more unified world. Super nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. This is a pleasure.
Yeah, you're super inspiring. Everything that you do is really incredible, and it's a privilege and an honor to be able to talk to you about it and have you share a little bit about your journey and your experience. And I think when I think about you, obviously I think about this incredibly talented ultra runner, but really what you're about is so much more than that. And I think right now we can both agree that the country is very divided. There is a communication gap. There is this division that is separating us, and our ability to communicate has broken down. Our communities are fractured. And the path forward, the healthy path forward, is to try to find a way to bridge that gap, to try to improve the health of our communication, right? To unite around our shared value systems and beliefs. And you've really leveraged your running to try to promote this message. And I think it's beautiful. The adage of you can't know the world unless you know your backyard. I don't know who originally said that. Do you know who is, to whom is that quote attributable to?
I know it wasn't me.
Yeah. Somebody said that, but you actually not only took it to heart, but put it into practice. And you're really more of an artist than an athlete, in my mind. Like, you have used this medium of running great distances to paint this canvas of humanity in a really beautiful way. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And, I knew about you for a long time, and then really dived into what you were doing when you were doing the San Francisco every single street thing. And I knew that you had run across America, but I didn't know that much about that until I started prepping for talking to you today. And you sent me a cut of the Transamerica film, which is really quite moving. So how did that come together?
The film or the trip itself?
Let's talk about the trip, and then we can kind of weave in the film.
So the trip itself, 2 years ago, I ran across the country. I left on March 1st of 2017 and finished on August 1st of 2017. So a 5-month trip. Mm-hmm. The idea behind it is that I've competed on a national and international level. I've traveled all over the world pursuing this sport, this running, mountain running, trail running, ultra running. And I was just kind of getting to a point in my career where I needed to explore what else the sport really meant to me and what its potentials were. And that's kind of when I came to this realization that I knew so many more parts of the world than I do our own country. Mm-hmm. And such a huge part of that, realizing, as you just said, we have this breakdown in communication, with this increase in the bubble effect. It's becoming easier and easier to live within our own bubbles. It just occurred to me that such a huge problem of ours right now is that we're not talking to each other.
Right.
And what better way to do that, especially for someone in my position who can put in a lot of miles. I don't have the commitment of a family. I don't have the commitment of a 9-to-5 job, a standard job per se. What better way to really explore this than to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is to do a really big trek. And
how many years in the making was this?
I think that I could say that it was almost 10 years, 15 years in the making. But when I was 19 years old, I stopped going to college for a couple years. One of my goals during those 2 years off was to bike across the country. And so I saved up my money. I took the Greyhound bus up to Washington. I had this idea that I was going to bike around the entire United States, the circumference of the United States. I made it 3 days in and thought that I had completely destroyed my knee. And, this is with a serious road bike with big gears and 60 or 70 pounds of gear with me. I completely destroyed myself almost immediately. So I packed up my bike, I sent it to Colorado, and then I took my money and my time and went to Italy instead. So that was 18 years ago.
Yeah. It's funny, like at the peak of your, sort of physical powers as a young, strapping young man, on a bike, and you make it 3 days.
Totally. And it's just, it's the classic, I was just not mature enough to pursue something like that. And I just went way overboard. So it's been in my head since I was 19. I read a book or if not earlier, I read a book, A Walk Across America.
Oh, Peter Jenkins'
totally,
book.
When I was 17 or 18 or so. And that really stuck in my head, just this man's ability to connect with people for no other reason than he's out there on foot, putting himself in a vulnerable position.
Yeah, he really kind of put that type of expedition on the map. His son Jedediah is a good friend. Has been on the podcast a couple times.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. He's an amazing writer. If you haven't read his book, it's quite something.
Yeah, and I haven't read that. I'll check it out. So I'd been thinking about it for a while, and then the real planning. I thought about, I would say, for a year to 2 years ahead of time. Like, if I'm going to do this, like, how am I going to make it work for me? How would I want, it's not something that I anticipate doing twice. If you're just going to do this once, how are you going to make it worthwhile? And for me, that meant really diving into what America is and what I am personally.
Right.
And planning that beforehand. And so that means, looking at all of the history of the United States, how we came to be who we are, this westward expansion, this idea of manifest destiny, of I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. This idea that we created this country. But we did a lot of bad in the process. And so, how can I pursue a massive feat like this and touch upon all of those things at the same time?
How much did political news and the 2016 election play into the urgency to finally do this thing?
So I had the date set in my head before the elections. I don't know why I picked March 1st. I needed a round number, so I went with that. I knew that I was going to hit weather at some point during my trip, whether that be snow, rain, or extreme heat. So I had the date planned before the election, and many of us, I think on both the right and the left, I thought the election was going to go a different way. And then come November 8th, November 9th of 2016, when it did go the way that it did, I knew that it was going to be way more interesting than I had anticipated.
Did that influence the route? Because you make this decision to spend a lot of time in the South, and you go through, mostly red states over the course of the whole journey.
Well, it didn't influence the route so much, but I dare you to try and find a route across the United States where you're not going through a lot of red territory. And that's the nature of the country, and that's what I think a lot of us have learned over the past few years, especially when we're starting to look at the Electoral College and all of these things. Is the center part of the country is huge. It's there's a lot of space in between towns, but there's a lot of space in general, which accounts for a large population.
Right.
So it didn't influence my route all that much, but I did know after the elections that it was going to be really interesting. I was going to be, I wanted to go through the South because I've spent very little time in the South. I was raised by parents who didn't necessarily have a prejudice against the South, but there was not a lot of urgency to bring us there. My mom was a hippie in the 1960s. Yeah. She's a hippie today in 2019. And I think in the 1960s, you had this common dialogue going on that warned people from going to the South. Right. You've got Easy Rider, where you've got your protagonists and meeting their end there, and that's just one of a few different stories. So.
Right. So you just got married, right?
Just got married 2.5 weeks ago. Thanks. Yeah.
That's very cool. You've been with Liz for 7 or 8 years or something like that?
Almost a decade at this point.
Yeah. Wow. But at the inception of this run, my sense is, and you allude to this, sort of you comment on it, but you don't spend too much time talking about the fact that you're kind of going through a bit of an existential crisis, perhaps about your relationship, but perhaps about things greater that motivated you to kind of take a break from your relationship and carve out this time for yourself. So what was going on with you kind of mentally and emotionally going into the run?
It's something like to this day that I don't know that I can answer entirely, other than it just seemed like a trip to me. It seemed like a part of my life and a trip to me where I needed to be on my own. And I don't know really a better way to say that other than that. I couldn't fathom really thinking about anyone other than myself during this time.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I thought a lot about other people, and especially Liz. And so it's a live and learn thing. I'm glad that it has turned out the way that it has, and that I think that we both learned a lot from that break that we took, and yeah, it was definitely a challenge. It was a challenge then, and even looking back on it, it continues to be a challenge. Yeah. When you put a little fracture in a relationship like that, as well as as you can repair it, it's still there.
Yeah.
So it's something for us to always think about, and for me to be able to tell other people as well.
Right.
That's something that, when people are having issues with their relationships, our tendency is to go inward rather than outward. And I don't think we really talk enough about mistakes that we've made or issues that we've had. And, I think that that's really important for me to put that out there.
Right. And there's something about running and that solitude that accompanies it that gives you the space and the capacity to kind of wrestle with those things and get clarity for yourself. I mean, there's a monologue in the film. I think it's after you've left Aspen and you're in the snow and in the Rockies, where you say, look, running was about competition for most of my life, measuring myself against others and a clock, but it's become a process of not just connecting with other humans, but a process of self-discovery. And that's like a huge theme in everything that you do and in this beautiful movie.
Yeah. And I think that if most of us that do run or walk or bike or pursue something with consistency year after year, I think if we really look at what it's doing for us, I think that a lot of us will find the same things.
Right.
And this is something that I tell people, and running has been my thing, but I don't think that's necessarily the thing for everybody. I think that
right.
knitting could be that thing, crochet, badminton. Like I just think for me, I chose this activity 25 years ago, and I've stuck with it for 25 years. And when you stick with something for that long, whether it's an activity or a person, you're going to continue to learn so much more about that, but also, and more importantly, you're going to learn so much more about yourself. And
right.
this thing just keeps changing and changing and changing. And it's that consistency that allows for that to happen.
Right. So lots of people have run across America.
Yeah.
I just had this guy, Robbie Ballinger, on the show who did it last year. He did it in like 75 days. My friend Mike Posner just walked across America. But most people that do this do it with an RV and a lot of support. That support tends to be off camera. A lot of it do, you know what
Conveniently.
I mean? Yeah. But you decide to do this unsupported. And for a vast majority of the entire expedition, it's just you with a very light backpack and a tarp and a ground cloth and a little bit of food, and basically that's it.
Yeah. So, I've been at this sport for quite a while. I wouldn't say that I have a huge following, but I do have people that are paying attention to what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And for me personally, it doesn't seem right to put this project out there in a way that I don't think is accessible to a normal person. And by that, I mean, I don't think most people can pull together an RV and the funds to pay for a person and gas and food for multiple people for months on end. Conversely, I do think that a lot of people, ideally, if you're younger and you have the physical capability, can put together the funds and the time to do it in the same way that I did. Right. And maybe you're not doing.
It's funny because there's a little bit of an irony in there, because you're like, I'm going to do this super extreme thing to show how doable it is for everybody.
Yeah, and maybe not everybody, but I do believe, how many people are doing the Appalachian Trail these days? You've got several thousand people starting the Appalachian Trail these days. And I think the Appalachian Trail is awesome. Like, there's no doubt about it. But like, how much are you really going to learn about? You're going to learn a lot about yourself, and you're going to learn a lot about trail culture. But how much are you really going to learn about the United States in this greater context? It's a form of escapism, and that's sometimes exactly what we need, is to escape what's going on outside of our front door. But for me personally, like, I needed to explore something a lot deeper than just myself and just the physical capabilities of something like that. So I set a budget for myself. I did $1,000 a month, $5,000 total for the 5 months.
Wow.
I slept outside most nights. I'd get a hotel or a motel once a week or once every 10 days. That increased more towards like once every couple days towards the end, as I started kind of losing it a little bit.
Yeah.
And simply needed to go into a room and lock the door and turn the AC on and turn some mindless television on. But for the most part, what I wanted to do was to put it out there that this is something that people can do, and that there's alternatives to these, to doing the Appalachian Trail or going to Europe for 4 months. Like, you can just pack a very light backpack and see what's out there. And it's really incredible when when people see that all you have is in your backpack, and they ask you if you've got a gun, to protect yourself, and like, no, I don't have a gun. Just putting yourself out there in a vulnerable position, the amount of warmth and generosity that I experienced was something that I never could have anticipated in a million years. People giving me every last dollar from their wallet, and
there's the guy, what's his name?
Jim Steele.
He gives you $80 or $160.
I said 180. It was, I said 80. It was 160.
Right.
It was $160. And
he wasn't taking no for an answer.
No, it was amazing. It was, and that's when I kind of realized, that people in their own way want to participate in this thing. A few years ago, so this is kind of something that I think about, and the best way for me to tell this is to talk about someone else running across the country, and that was Pete Kostelnik, who did across the country in 44 days. It could have been a little quicker. This is in 2016, so a year before, or a few months before I did mine. He did this, and he was doing 60 to 70 miles a day for 44 days, and broke the record that had stood for
unsupported.
That was very supported. That was 2 or 3 RVs with several people. Yeah, it was a big effort for a lot of people, and he's sure to give them credit as well.
Yeah.
But for me personally, so I was in Wisconsin at the time, and I saw that he was going through northern Illinois, and I got in my car and drove 2.5 hours just to run with him for a few miles, because it's like, I just felt like it was seeing this mythical creature when someone's doing something like that. And even now to this day, like now that I've done this big journey, like I still think it's a mythical creature. It's like seeing a mountain lion or something. And and so I think that for me, that's what it was for kind of when I came to realize that some people, when they wanted to give me money or just stop and talk, it was like, it is something rare.
Right. There's the one guy who it looks like he turned his car around when he saw you and he got out and he's like, my friend's going to freak out. I read about you like when you crossed the state line or something like that.
Yeah.
So there was some awareness as you were passing through of what you were doing.
Totally. In certain areas. I don't know why it was in certain areas. It was Oklahoma and Arkansas where I received the most amount of generosity and warmth. And then when I got to California, ironically, it was nothing.
It's interesting like that. Like, I think what I appreciate most is you know, there's a vein of humility and vulnerability that infuses, you know, this effort and the other things that you've done. And this Transamericana journey is almost like this performance art piece that is part de Tocqueville, part Henry David Thoreau. Like, I'm going to light out on America and learn about democracy and connect with people to try to better understand them, better understand myself, and better understand, you know, what is required to unite us and bring us together.
Totally. And
you took your time.
Yeah.
Like, the priority wasn't the running, the priority was the connection.
Yep. And the funniest thing that I encountered, or the most interesting thing that I encountered when I went across the country, is that, like, I thought I would be talking politics all the time, and it never came up. It was just like, when you're doing something like that, when people see something like that, they don't want to ask you what your political views are. They want to ask you about, like, what you're doing, what you're seeing out there, and it just becomes really incredible that so much of this stuff just kind of dissolves away. And you realize that, and I think I say the same thing in the movie coming out, is that I don't think so, I know so, we're way more similar than we are different.
Yeah.
It's, I think that we're 90% similar and 10% different. And that 10% difference has become inflated so that we think that it's 90%, but it's not.
Right, it's exploited.
Exactly.
You know, and it's leveraged by the media to further divide us.
Totally. And you know, I subscribe to my own media, and a lot that's been brought to my attention over the past couple of years with talk of fake news and all of these things is coming to terms with that the media that I pay attention to is also biased. And it's not just Fox News, like NPR is also biased. We've all got these biases, and you know, we like to think that we're right about our convictions. But the reality is that, you know, there's a million different paths out there.
Yeah.
And if you grew up in Kansas and on a farm in Kansas and you had that lifestyle, and, you know, I just see their voting habits, their convictions as every bit as valid as mine. And that's probably the biggest thing that I gained from my run across the country is coming to terms with that.
Yeah. Did it change your media diet in any way? Did it expand like what you expose yourself to, or contract that? Or, you know, what is the lingering kind of long-term impact? Because this was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So you've had time to reflect.
Totally.
And have some objectivity on it.
It has. And let's see, how do I put this? It's just made me pay attention to other forms of media, and I don't necessarily subscribe to them, but being aware that that Fox News is out there, and that this is where my dad gets his information, and that if I can allow myself to believe that, you know, maybe NPR or whatever it is that I pay attention to, I don't necessarily believe this, but if I can believe that NPR is just as biased as Fox News is, based on you know, our polarized convictions,
right,
and the agenda behind them, then that's what's stuck with me from that trip, at least in terms of my attention to media.
Right. So you start in South Carolina, and there's this great scene where you sell your car for $1,000, and then you have to pay her to give you a ride to the beach.
Yeah.
And she couldn't care less what you were doing. She seems totally disinterested. And like, unflappable about the whole experience. And it's very unceremonious how you begin. You kind of dip your toe into the ocean and then you're like, all right, I guess we're starting now.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Totally. I mean, I don't know. There's no real way to start a trip like that. And I didn't want anyone there. I did have a videographer there, my friend Jared, with The Wandering Fever, who's making this film with Salomon, my main sponsor, as the backer behind it. And I was grateful to have him. He rented a car, so after we sold that car, he rented a car, and I had backup for the first 6 days, which was just really nice. It was a nice, soft way to enter this journey. But yeah, it's just crazy starting a trip like that. It's like you really do that quote definitely emerges. A trip of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and like that first step is just like so wah. It's just like, yeah, and then there's another step, and it's just,
I guess we're doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get to the end of the first day, and like I only did like 13 miles that day, and I got completely sunburned. And on day one, blisters, like sunburn, hungry, like everything.
Right.
And it's just like, wow. All right.
It's going to be a long adventure.
Totally.
Well, it seemed like most of the most profound encounters that you had with human beings took place during that like tour of the South, like from South Carolina through Oklahoma, is where you connected the most with people. And then then you kind of enter this, phase where the expanses of nature begin to, just get bigger and bigger, and those encounters are fewer and fewer.
Yeah.
And then like you're in Aspen and you do a reset where you're home with your family and your friends. And it almost felt like all the questions that you were asking of yourself and of others had kind of been answered at that point. Like every intention that you went into this run, in terms of like things that you wanted to solve for yourself or discover or learn, had kind of been resolved and answered.
Yeah.
But yet you have this whole, actually the hardest part of the whole thing still remained for you to do. Was there a moment where you were like, I don't need to get to California. Like I've kind of satisfied myself here?
There was, I would say that I can safely say that there was no moment where that actually occurred to me. It was just kind of like, I don't know, it's like going down the Grand Canyon or going through the rapids or something. It's like you're halfway through the rapids and you're like, that was fun. But it's like, there's no getting out. There's no getting off the river. And that was my mentality. Right. And I think it was, in terms of completing the goal, that was the best mentality to have. For my personal health and my mental sanity, it probably wasn't the best. But it did bring me to a place that I couldn't have anticipated or gotten to otherwise. Yeah. And I still think about it a lot to this day, 2 years later, just like the state of mind that I ended up getting into in the desert, in the depths of it, and just kind of this full emptiness of self, and and you start to think about other, some very big names throughout the course of human history who have tested themselves in the desert and for long periods of time. And growing up Catholic, the first one obviously to come to mind is Jesus in the desert for 40 days. And I'm not overly religious anymore, but it's something that I think about in that sense, is like, how accurate that story is, or how much you want to interpret that story. Like the body and the mind goes through some really serious changes when you're in the desert for that long, and you start to lose it a little bit, and you just start to become really empty, and your ego truly becomes dissolved, and you just have this goal to get across it, and you start doing and not thinking, and it's a really beautiful thing.
Well, it's like a purification, right?
Exactly.
It's like you've traversed a huge section of the country. You've been enriched through all these experiences that you've had and all these people that you've met along the way. And now, in order for you to become whole, we got to strip you down to your, we're going to take you through this section of the country that is going to basically beat you down and burn you to a crisp until you're forced to meet yourself in the most profound way that you ever have before. And then you can reassemble all these pieces and emerge from this experience like transformed.
Totally.
Really. Like it is biblical in a certain respect. And it's also this kind of, hero's journey. Like you're not done yet. Now the final phase, we're going to put you through this thing and see if you can weather this.
Totally. And it's not permanent, which is kind of a bummer. That purification of the soul, if that's what we're going to call it, it's not permanent.
Yeah.
Like I finished the trip and
back to resetting.
Totally. It's like, all right, what do I do with, and this
Right.
is where I'm curious to talk, or listen to other people that have gone through similar sort of things. Like how do you put your life together after this? You're not going to keep walking forever. And it's funny. Of course, you tell anybody that you went across the country on foot, and 9 times out of 10 they'll say, "Oh, you like Forrest Gump?"
Right.
And of course you're like, "Oh yeah, Forrest. Okay, that was a movie, but yes." But there is this scene in the movie where he just, like, you can see it's like it's very real. Like he has purified himself, and he just stops in the desert and he says he's done. He's going home.
Right.
It's like there's nothing else to be done.
I figured if I found everything that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Right.
And it gives me goosebumps right now. It's kind of funny to think about Forrest Gump even after I've done that, and to recognize those similarities and the astuteness of the film itself in putting that in there,
right?
And just not labeling it overtly, but having it there and just seeing like he was done, like there was nothing more to be gained from that journey.
Right. But you were not in the desert and you did not have that epiphany in that moment.
No.
Yeah. Well, it is most people's only frame of reference
Totally.
for anything that you're doing. And rather than be annoyed by that, to be able to embrace it and say, actually, that was profound. Yes,
Yeah.
I am retracing those steps in that way on this journey.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Of all the encounters that you had along the way, what are the ones that stick with you?
So there was that one, this is in the film, Jim Steele, who literally emptied out every dollar of his wallet and gave it to me. And that was quite profound. That was in Arkansas on a particularly miserable day. I could remember, I was in between 2 towns. One was called Quitman. I suppose you would pronounce it Quitman. And the other was, I forget what the other town was, but it was like, in a day where if I was really paying attention to what the universe was telling me to do, it was telling me to quit, man. And this guy pulls up and just as he said, in the spirit that it's given, just gave me every dollar out of his pocket.
Was he driving along the road and
he
stopped?
Yeah, he was driving along the road and pulled up alongside of me and saw me with my backpack and my beard and asked if I was running across the country. And he said, "I want to talk to you." And he was up ahead another 200 meters, and we just had a short conversation, but I think it was equally as impactful for both of us. Another one was in the middle of the Nevada desert. There's this, on Highway 50 in Austin, Nevada, there's this bar there called the Serbian Christmas Bar or something like that. And there's this a Serbian man that owns the restaurant. And it was just funny to find an article written about him. The article was about Highway 50, but then it focused in on this man. And I found this article and just talking about how racist and terrible of a human being this guy is. And so went in there and had several beers with him and had a great time and heard his perspective and tried to take it in as best I could. But, still in the end walked away with a new friend. Gosh, there was so many along the. So I did a section of rivers. So you were asking like kind of how I came up with the idea of this run, and one of the things like, so I did about 1,000 miles of trail, to 2,500 miles of road, and 300 miles of river. I did the Tennessee River going across Alabama in the spirit of American westward expansion.
It's very Huckleberry Finn.
Yeah, Huck Finn, and also Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark did about 1,000 miles of upriver. They went up, I believe, the Mississippi, and then to the Missouri. They went up the Missouri quite a ways before setting off on land. But just trying to get a feel for that, when you can take advantage of water, you do. And so I was going down the river for a couple days, and or at that point 3 or 4 days, and I just about to cross into Alabama, and needed to get some food from Pittsburgh, Tennessee, South Pittsburgh, Tennessee, and pulled onto this private dock. And I've got my wet sleeping bag out, my paddleboard up on this dock, and this fancy car drives up right then. And I'm like, oh gosh, this is the landowner. And sure enough, it was. And he had read an article that was published in the Memphis, Tennessee. I can't remember the name of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I can't remember the name of the newspaper, but he just comes up to me and he says, "Are you that skinny boy running to San Francisco?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He's like, "I'm taking you to supper." And so we get in his car, and he drove me into town. He's the fourth generation CEO, owner of Lodge cast iron, the skillets, and took me all over town's about 1,000 people. Introduced me to the entire staff in the office. They all thought I was a bit kooky, but this guy is like mid-70s, and just like you could tell was a total character, and just wanted to talk about rivers and how he's coming to the end of his time at the company, and he's going to go start doing big river trips. And wow. And so that was really awesome. And
so he give you a bed to sleep in that night?
No, I had to keep going. Yeah, he would have, and I would have taken him up on it, but it was midday. Right. And so I needed to keep going, and he pulled out $100 out of his pocket and said, "Can I give this to you?" And I said, I really don't need it. I saved up my money, and 75 years old, the guy gives me knuckles. And he's like, "Right on."
Wow. Yeah, it's kind of like you're this Western manifest destiny version of the Buddhist ascetic, who basically is relying on the kindness of strangers to survive.
Yeah.
Were there opportunities where people were opening up their homes and letting you crash there for the night and stuff like that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. One in particular, a memorable one, was on the Osage Reservation in Oklahoma, northeastern Oklahoma. And I had gotten to this town, spacing the name of the town right now, but got there, was buying a couple beers at the store, and this guy behind me in line, that's what it was. I was asking the clerk, because I had spent the previous night out in the rain, and I wanted a nice dry spot to sleep. I wasn't looking for anything other than a dry spot. And she's like, "Yeah, I don't know. The bridge over there it's okay, but I think it's pretty rocky there." And this guy behind me in line, he just looks at me and he says, "You're not gonna, so long as you don't steal anything and you don't go into my brother's room, who owns the place, you can stay with me, brother man." And he had a 12-pack of beer, and we went back to his place and talked for the next 4.5 hours.
Wow.
And
I can't imagine the set of circumstances that would have to arise for me to invite like a stranger who's in line with me at some store back to my house to crash. You know what I mean? Like we've lost that. Maybe that's a small town thing and it seems like a small gesture, but that's kind of a big thing.
It is a big thing. Yeah. And it was, it seems to me that I encountered that way more, like that sort of generosity. I encountered that way more in the South, and then less so as I got into the West. So yeah, I don't know what that says about us or about the South, or maybe it's still
what do you make
there.
of America? What is your summation?
So I mean, after that trip, I thought America was great, and I still do to this day. And it definitely, it rekindled this love that I have for this country, and I just think that. I mean, I'm not going to go out preaching to everybody to go run or walk across the country, but running across our county or whatever it is, can do a lot.
Well, not everyone's going to run across America. Very few are, but everybody has the ability to more profoundly connect with their neighbors.
Totally.
And I think that's what I take away from it, that there are all little things that we can do every single day to try to bridge this divide a little bit better than we have.
And I think such a huge part of it is like physically getting out there and meeting people. And it's really uncomfortable. Like initially, it's really uncomfortable.
Well, you have the ultimate icebreaker. It's like when you open up with like, this is what I'm doing, like everyone's going to want to talk to you.
Totally.
But you strike me, it's not like you're this super outgoing person. Like you're kind of a quiet guy, right? Like, was that uncomfortable for you to be that open and vulnerable and like roll up on strangers when you're passing through?
It wasn't, going back to this myth of the mountain lion, when you really start to embody that, like you really start to feel like you are something special, even though it's not lasting for that long. It's just lasting for the few months that you're doing it. And then, when it's done, it's something that you have done. It's no longer something that you are doing. Yeah. So while you are doing that thing, I found that it was really quite easy for me to go into a bar and kind of puff up my chest and say, I'm running across the country. Who's buying me a beer?
Lots of free beers, I would imagine.
Totally. Yeah. And then when it's over, that's where the real work, I think, begins. At least for the individual, is like, what do you do with this thing that you have done that you are no longer doing? Right.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you think of yourself or call yourself an artist. I certainly do. And part of being an artist, the definition of art and being an artist is to perceive the world through your unique lens and then translate it using some form of medium to elucidate a greater truth about humanity or the world, right? And that can come in a variety of forms. It can be in the analog, like encounters that you're having when you're running across America, but you do it in many ways. Like you're very much a storyteller through photography, through film, the writing on your website. I'd never been to your website before. Your website is super cool. Like the way it's laid out so minimally and beautifully, but everything that you've written on it and the visual aesthetic of it, like it speaks to that artistic sensibility, and the storytelling aspect of what you've done is super important. And I'm sure it's no mistake that this film, still hasn't come out 2 years since you've done the run, like the amount of work to try to get it right and tell the story that you want to tell.
Totally. And, I'm looking over at this book here that you have, Open Water, published by Chronicle Books. I'm going to shamelessly promote that I've got a book coming out about this as well.
Oh, you do? Cool.
By Chronicle.
Oh, good. When is that
happening? Spring, April 2020.
Oh, good. Then I can corral you to come back here.
Wonderful.
Talk about it some more.
Perfect. But yeah, it's that, and I had both the film and the movie in mind before I started this trip, and it was part of my packing. It was like, I want to be able to, I don't want to just do this for me. I'm doing this for a lot of people that don't have the ability, whether it's physically, whether it's money, whether it's family, time, any number of things. Like, how can I share this with as many people as possible in as positive of a way as possible? And so, yeah, I don't know if I've totally embraced the title of artist yet. I think that I studied sociology and photography in school, and with photography, certainly you talk a lot about art. It's such a technical pursuit that you're oftentimes talking about technique rather than the meaning behind all of what you're shooting. But that element has always been there for me, and
your wife's an artist.
She is, yeah, very much.
Now you live in like an artist collective in Santa Fe, so just embrace this moniker, Rickey.
All right, I'll shift my my resume around.
Well, when I'm watching the movie, I'm thinking about the logistics of how you pulled this off. Not in addition to the run, like how you managed the workflow of like capturing all of this. I would imagine a lot of it's on iPhone, but you had cameras with you, and I'm thinking, how many SD cards did he bring, and how is he keeping the batteries charged, and what is he doing with all the footage to make sure that it doesn't get wet and ruined and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I destroyed I think at least 2, and I think probably 3 Sony RX100s. I'm surprised they still give me the insurance deal on them, because I buy those at $1,000 a pop and $100 on the insurance, and they never last me for more than 6 months. But they're great cameras. Chest mounted GoPro, and then the iPhone, and it was just kind of funny at times there, like when I've got literally several weeks of footage on my person. Like it no longer is anything worth anything except for those cards there.
And are they in Ziploc bags and super? Like, how are you protecting all that stuff?
Yeah.
No. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of beautiful cinematography and incredible drone shots and the like. So you had a crew that would like drop in for short periods, right?
Totally. So I had Jared, so with the Wandering Fever, Dean Leslie and his wife Hannah, they're an incredible artistic couple that have done most of Salomon's running films over the past 8 or 9 years. I've worked with Dean on a whole bunch of projects. We've been on 5 different continents together. And so this was definitely a new route for us, for me to shoot a lot and just hand that over. And then he sent out his assistant Jared to join me for at the beginning for 1 week, and then in the middle in Colorado for 3 weeks and into the desert, and then at the end for 4 days. And so it was you're just kind of keeping your fingers crossed that you're getting everything. For me personally, it was a challenge to, on the worst of days, to pull out the camera and point it at myself and talk to myself or talk to an audience. When I'm feeling borderline crippled, to set the camera up and run back and forth in front of the camera.
Yeah, there's a couple times where I was like, he put the camera there and then went back and ran by it.
Yeah. No, some outtakes would be hilarious. The camera falling to the ground and but I was having now seen the evolution of the film. I'm grateful for all that we did put into it.
Were there times? It has to be awkward at times when you're having these encounters with people to pull out a camera and say, can I document this?
Yeah, it was awkward at times. I only got turned down twice. Yeah, and people were pretty chill about it. I think they appreciated, again, what I was doing, and they'd ask what it's for, and I say, well, I might make a movie about this, but really I just want to remember the people that I'm meeting along the way.
And what's the plan with the movie? I mean, as of today, it's not out publicly yet.
Yeah. Well, keeping our fingers crossed. It's been submitted to a couple of the bigger independent film fests here in the States. And so that's kind of the ultimate goal, is to see it on the big screen in Austin or in New York City. So
Nice.
Yeah. If any of you guys are out there.
Yeah. It's an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. So a little bit shorter than a typical nonfiction documentary, but much longer than anything you'd done prior.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the run every street thing.
Yeah.
Because the Transamericana was taking this very thin line across America. In many ways, just circumstances dictating that you have to keep it somewhat on a surface level. And the running every street in San Francisco thing, which really put you on the map and created like a media frenzy, was a different version of that allowed you to go deep, right?
Yeah.
To like more immerse yourself in your community on that same theme of, you can't know the world unless you know your neighborhood. And you're like, I live here. Like, let me learn this.
Totally.
And people think of San Francisco as a relatively small city. Yeah. That is not the case if you're going to run every street.
Totally.
So how did that idea come to you?
So that actually came to me almost immediately after running across the country. So Liz and I got back together. We got back together as I was running across the country. We started discussing, where's next. We were in Wisconsin where she was doing her MFA program, and she had a couple great job prospects in San Francisco, and I can again kind of live anywhere. So I signed up for that, and we moved back to the Bay Area, and it was really kind of in my recovery time from running across the country where I was sitting up in the Berkeley Hills at this really cool house that we had scored for the summer. And out on the porch there where you're looking at everything from Mount Tam to Sausalito, Golden Gate Bridge, the Bay Bridge, downtown San Francisco. You're looking down the peninsula. You're looking at Oakland and Fremont. You've got a view of a population of 2 million people and so much commerce, so much transportation coming and going. Really, it was, I'm not going to call it the opposite of my experience that I had just done going across the country, but in terms of the space and the solitude that I had experienced doing 40, 50 miles a day running across the country, it was so dense and still so completely foreign to me. To have had such a massive experience, such as running across the country, and then look it down at this human hive of 2 million people and kind of realizing that like my experience was so limited with what I had just done. And that if you really want to get to know a country, a place, like this is such a critical part of it as well is getting to know the densest part, the place where humans actually congregate in mass. And so that's when I'm looking at that and I'm like, well, all right, so how many miles of street are there in San Francisco? Like if you're, it's a reasonably, it's a compact city. It's got very strict borders. It's a 7 by 7 mile square. I started doing my research. How many miles are there? And I think it said 1,150 miles of street or 1,100 miles of street in San Francisco. And so I'm like, okay, that's from approximately Denver to San Francisco. Like I know how far that is. I know how long that could potentially take me. Like what would that be like? And then more research, I find that San Francisco Chronicle writer, journalist, had done exactly that. Yeah, he walked it over about 7 years' time and wrote like 2 or 3 different articles about it. And I was immediately inspired. And I'm
Did you get in touch with that guy?
I tried my very best sleuthing ever. I called, his name is John Graham, and I called probably 10 different John Grahams, and not one
just
of them.
Cold call?
Cold call, yeah.
Like
it was
old
like,
phone book style?
Totally, it was. It was like, and I even contacted the Chronicle. I contacted a lot of people and and he'd moved to a different part of California, and so I looked for him there and like his age. I never talked to him. I'd still love to talk to him. I don't know if he knows that
I'm sure he knows now.
I would hope so. It's like, because it
Yeah.
is very inspiring, and his writings on it ended up becoming very similar to my impressions.
Right.
And so yeah, I wanted to take the same approach, but do it ultra runner style, and just massive miles every day, and see, because if he took 7 years to do it, a city can completely change in 7 years, especially a city like San Francisco.
You got to start over and do it again.
Totally. But what's if you can do it in 6 weeks or 2 months, I feel like you're getting a snapshot of that place at that moment in time.
Right. Just looking at the grid of San Francisco when you were embarking on this, I thought, like, well, first of all, like, how do you even figure out how you're going to do this route and do it in a sane, like, well-planned manner? Yeah. And I realized, like, that's a super complicated equation to solve. But when I started digging into it more, getting ready to talk to you today, I realized, oh, it's even way more complicated than I would have imagined. And you sought out the advice or the counsel of, like, a friend of yours who was a professor, right? Who like works in computer mapping or something like that to help you figure out, like, the best way to approach this.
Yeah. And so we have 70 emails back and forth from each other from my run of San Francisco. It was every single day I was communicating with him. His name's Michael Odie. We were on the cross country team together in high school. He's a brilliant human being, and he loved the idea that I was going for this, like a literal human guinea pig for this equation that he's been thinking about before I even mentioned it to him. And in the end, I used very little of his information.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it wasn't because his information was bad. It was because of so many different variables, like translating the equation into usable terms for myself. And so, like, how do you do that? You put it in Google Maps, or you put it in, like, there's this app called Map My Run, or I forget what they're called. But they actually can talk to you from your phone, like, take a left here at the end of this block, turn around. And San Francisco's too dense for that to actually work, for it to work seamlessly. And so, or, if you got off the route, so it would program a 10-mile loop, is what they call it, because you are starting and finishing in the same place, even though it doesn't look at all like a loop. If you got off your loop at all, you're on mile 2, and then, like, only 1 block away, you might be on mile 5. The equation would skip those 3 miles but then it would ruin my entire plan for the day. And so I ended up I found that it was, for me personally, it was easier to have a map in my hand and kind of figure out my route throughout the day. And it was like, it actually became kind of fun. Like, I'm not a puzzle person, like crossword puzzles or the Rubik's Cube. I've never solved a Rubik's Cube in my life. But when it gets translated into running terms, and you're actually running this crossword puzzle or this Rubik's Cube, and if you do it well, then it'll take you 25 miles. If you do it poorly, it's going to take you 28 miles. Like, at the end of a 25-mile day, those 3 extra miles
that's a big
is huge incentive for you to get this problem right. And so it became really exciting, and I got really good at it.
Yeah, you have to be this cartographer, urban archaeologist to solve it. And it's interesting. So this professor was, like, crunching algorithms to solve it, but ultimately you went a little bit more on, like, feel and tactile printed out maps and things like that.
Totally. And like, there's just a lot of things that he couldn't possibly account for. And some of those,
you can't park your van there for all day or something
totally
like that.
That's one thing. You can't park your car there, or, it would make sense for the sake of the algorithm to go across this street and do, like, 2 or 3 blocks in a different neighborhood, and which you would therefore not have to do on a different day. But it would ruin the entire feel of that day. Like you're very much like a huge street like market going down the center of San Francisco.
Like staying within like a sub-ecosystem.
Exactly.
And not crossing into a different kind of like cross-section of humanity.
That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really want to do that. And so he would figure out, so this is those 70 emails back and forth is him not just figuring out a good algorithm, but figuring out what Rickey wants.
Right. Yeah. And so were you sleeping in your van at night, or were you going home up to the Berkeley Hills?
So I ended up sleeping in, long story short, a couple European friends came over to the States wanting a van. I helped them buy a van. I had no intention of using this van. I was just going to sell it when they left. And when they left is when this project started, and that's when I realized, like, this is going to save me. This is going to save me 2 hours a day of driving when I'm going to be extremely tired, and I didn't want to deal with traffic, and so I ended up sleeping in my van for most of it. And Liz would come into the city and camp out in the city, urban camping. I should have, and I probably still can, come up with an amazing map of the best camp spots in San Francisco proper. Like places where you can be up on a hill with your door open, looking at stars and the city skyline, and completely safe. And it was a really cool part of it. And then, of course, just being able to end my day, right there, and then start the next day right there.
And you never had to worry about hydration or food, right? Did you just go into restaurants and eat, or how did you manage like the calories?
Almost entirely restaurants. Yeah. In Chinatown, it was Chinese food, and in the Sunset, it was Vietnamese and pho, and in the Mission, it was tacos, lots of tacos,
right.
And I again carried 2 different cameras with me in order to be able to document all of it. So I had the Sony RX100 and then a little GoPro, and then my cell phone. So I guess I had 3 cameras.
Yeah, and we should say Salomon made a film out of that called Every Single Street. Was it the same people that worked on the Transamericana?
Totally. Yeah, The Wandering Fever. Yeah. And it was a really fun film to work on. Just kind of it was different than going across the country, because we were talking about how when I was running across the country, like I didn't even have to tell people, or if I did want to tell people,
right.
And, it was like people were immediately interested in what I was doing. This was completely the opposite.
Like, who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Who cares? Exactly.
But your ability to interact with people is 100-fold higher.
Yeah.
Like you're just surrounded by people the entire time.
Totally.
So what were those encounters like? Like what was similar and what was different about the interpersonal, encounters, experiences that you had?
Yeah, they were a lot shorter. They weren't, I'll admit, for the most part, they weren't as deep. It's just the nature of living in a city. And that's part of what I wanted to discover on something like that is, the city, you're just packed, like it's constant stimulation, and that's people, that's cars, that's noise, it's food, like all of these things.
Stuff you would have killed for when you were running across the desert.
Totally. Yeah. With the exception of the lack of intimacy. And I think that that speaks a lot to what a city is. A lot of people, for me personally, like if I want to go get lost, like I go out into the mountains, and that's my quiet spot. That's where I go to be by myself. For a lot of people, that space is the city. Like that's they appreciate the anonymity of being in the city, and how nobody really looks at you, nobody really cares. I think that's really a safe place for a lot of people.
But also lonely and alienating.
Totally, yeah. That's the flip side of that coin. And so it's it was. I would say my most powerful interactions with people in San Francisco were homeless people, and I think a huge part of that was this dedication on my part. Can be just as guilty of this as the next person, and that's to ignore this problem. But when you're running certain streets in San Francisco, dead end street in the middle of Soma, like there is absolutely no reason to go to the end of that dead end street unless you're going there to shoot up and then pass out. And so when I find myself there and there's people there, what are you going to do? Say, hey, how you doing? And they look at you, looking at them, and you can have a conversation. Maybe you don't. I never felt in danger by any means. I certainly have it on my side that I'm, a young white male.
A guy in running shoes isn't very threatening.
Totally.
It's not like an alarm bell sounding off if you're running around. But, you're putting yourself in precarious situations.
Yeah.
But you never had any brushes with danger.
No.
Yeah.
It was, maybe like on my final day running through the Tenderloin in San Francisco, like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, this guy, I came around a corner and he like threw a fake punch at me, like at my face, and just stopped right short. And he was just sizing me up. That was like and when he saw that I didn't even flinch. And the reason that I didn't flinch is because I had just run 48 or 49 miles that day, and I was completely exhausted. And like, I don't think it really would have mattered to me if he'd have knocked me out. That probably would have been a nice end to that day. He just said, "All right, man."
Well, in part inspired by that expedition, I've told the story before, but I spend half the week in downtown LA because I've got a daughter that goes to a high school down there, and it's too far to commute on the daily. And I'm used to running in the trails around here. Yeah. And I kind of took it upon myself. Like, I've lived in Los Angeles for over 20 years, but until last year, I would rarely go downtown. There was just no reason to. And there's, as you know, Los Angeles is sprawling, it's gigantic, and there's very little, there's huge patches of it that I've never been to and know nothing about. And so I've taken it upon myself to better connect with my environment. And when I do my runs downtown, it's all city streets, and I try to take different routes, and I'll go through, like, we're right on the edge of Skid Row. So I always run through Skid Row, and I'll run around MacArthur Park, which are places that, everyone will tell you don't go there. And I found the people, to be like really friendly. And these are people they're living in tents on the street, and I get high fives and they recognize me now. And there's like a friendly kind of like rapport there. Whereas when I go on the trails around here, like, I'll wave to somebody running on the trail and they don't even wave back,
right?
And I'm like, that's not right.
Right.
There's so much to be learned if we can set aside our fears and our judgments and open ourselves up a little bit. Not to say that I've done anything like what you've done. I've just had a small taste of that.
Yeah.
What that experience must be like.
And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the benefit is, but I know that there is a benefit to stepping outside of our comfort zones and looking people in the eye. And I think it works both directions. I think that it makes those people feel more human. When you're sleeping on the street in the middle of downtown LA, you can feel less and less like a human. And it makes you and me feel more human as well, and tap into this empathy that I think can go a really long way in this time in our society, and something that perhaps we're losing a little bit, and it's a good way to kind of gain it back a little.
We need more empathy.
More empathy.
We definitely need more empathy
absolutely.
And humility, I think, are keystones for a better future.
Absolutely.
One of your main goals, or the impetus behind the Transamericana run, was to inspire people, to help them realize, like, hey, this is doable, $1,000 a month, that whole thing. But but kind of ironically, the Run Every Street thing has been the template that has been copied and emulated by, you've created like a social movement now. There are people all over the world who are doing their version of what you've done. And there's news articles about it. Like that guy, there's a guy in Scotland, I think, who was a kickboxer who then he tried to do what you did in his own town. So that has to be really cool to see kind of like the ripple effect of that.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so like, I don't follow much on social media, but I do follow the every single street hashtag. And it's just so cool to be able to see, like outwardly, they're not the most amazing photographs or accomplishments on a day-to-day basis, but you keep kind of going through these, and you're realizing like, no, you're just seeing a normal person's version of where they live, and yeah, it's just really cool.
I mean, you're fertilizing these seeds that are planting the fruit of greater connectivity and community. Because the more people that are doing that, the more connected they are. Like they're having their version of your experience, which is uniting people and bringing them together.
Totally.
There was an article about a group in Vancouver that did every trail in Stanley Park, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that there was like 24,000 kilometers of trail in that park.
That's incredible.
And they were going to do every trail. And there's a big group photo of all of them together.
Yeah.
Like that's got to be amazing to see that.
Yeah. It's awesome. There's a guy doing it in Brazil, and just seeing the maps of I think this is like, it's, some of these ideas, they have to, we have to wait for that idea, for everything to come together for that idea to work. And right now, our technology is what is a big part of what's allowing this project to take off.
And I think the hunger and the thirst that people have to be more connected.
Yep, absolutely. Right? Yep.
On top of that, there are all these people doing art projects on the graphing, like the mapping part of it too. Yeah. Like you've been sharing those on Twitter, like people like these little, like, I don't know what you call them, like motion graphics of like seeing the street, like this map street art kind of thing. Yeah.
And it's sort of organic, but like organic on a human level, which is definitely organic, but, on a human level. So the one that I'm talking about, or thinking of, there's a couple in particular.
One won an award or something?
Yeah, totally. So this is a gentleman in France who I gave him all of the data from my project, and he digitalized the entire thing. So that was just for my data and the stuff that's out there. There's a guy in Zurich doing every single street in Zurich, and he's got some really cool graphics going along with that. But just the ability to wear a watch or wear your phone, and then to have this strange looking map of what you've accomplished during the day, to be able to show like, here's your photos of the stuff that you saw, and then here's this strange looking map. Yeah. And it looks way different. It looks way, a 10-mile run in the city where you've got this goal to cover all of the streets in a small area can look so much more impressive, just on a graphic level, than a 100-mile point-to-point run. Yeah. Because one's just a line and the other is this very intricate, detailed, both accomplishment of a run, but also accomplishment of human society, and that they created those streets and why are the streets in that shape.
I feel like you should also do like a Taschen style coffee table book with the photographs and kind of the graphics of the mapping and all of that tells the story in a more visual way.
Yeah. Working on it.
Oh, you are.
Every single street.com.
See, you're an artist. Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
I nabbed that up right away.
I like that, man. Yeah. How do you like make your life work? Like you live to me, you're the definition of a minimalist. Like you keep your overhead really low. You keep your life, you conduct your life in a way that allows you to do the things that you love, and you have sponsors that support you and all of that. But like, what does it look like on a daily basis?
Sometimes it's really exciting. Sometimes it's so mundane that it's depressing. Like having running, like I'm very fortunate to have running as part of my daily routine. And I would say less so than it was 10 years ago. I used to be obsessively like need to run every day. And now that's a little bit less. And I'm realizing that the less I run, if I don't have that routine, then that the sooner that existential crisis comes in. And that's usually a pretty good indication that I need to put my shoes on and get out for a run. But yeah, the day-to-day is, I don't know, it's, I'm trying to figure out, it's constant reinvention. So some days it's like, I feel like I accomplish so much, whether that's on an artistic level, photographs, writing, coming up with ideas, figuring out ways to execute those ideas. And then other days it's like virtually nothing at all. But what's important is having the time and the ability to be able to do those things.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm just, I'm interested in like how, like there's a lot of, I think of you in a way that's sort of similar to someone like Laird Hamilton. Like he's created a life out of surfing that has nothing to do with competition. And you emerged from the competitive sphere of ultra running to cut this very unique path that you own, and only you can do what you do. And you've been able to create a living out of that, which is like an amazing thing. Like you get to basically do what you want to do and pursue the projects that inspire you. And that's a gift. That's like this rare liminal space that most people, can't access in their lives.
Right.
And so, I mean, you're the product of a hippie parent, you were sort of raised to kind of cut your own unique path, I suppose, in many ways. But were there ever times where you thought like, I got to get a job, or like, those moments of doubt, or where your faith was questioned about whether this is really like, am I going to be able to do this?
Totally.
Like, it's got to be hard.
Yeah.
And
I think that almost every single day, should I get a job?
Right.
And it doesn't.
Have you ever had a job, like a normal
I've had
job?
a lot of jobs. I mean, I waited tables for 10 or 15 years. I helped distribute mezcal for a friend of mine for a little while. For a little bit there, I was delivering food in San Francisco on my motorcycle. So I've had lots of jobs, and more often than not, these jobs are to fill my day a little bit, and to meet people, and to pretty much to not be at home all day long.
Right.
And with running as my only outlet. But in terms of running as a job, and these more recent projects, it's something, when I decided to run across the country a couple years ago, it was just kind of a time in my career where, I'm not going to beat Kilian Jornet at anything.
Like how many times are you going to toe the line at some big race?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like so many of these races, I can tell you from experience, like it's win or lose. It's like, even if there's a podium, even if there's prize money 10 deep, it's people only recognize that you've won or you've lost, which is a shame, I think. But it's also just kind of the nature of the beast. And so in that sense, I decided like I want to start doing more project-based runs that possibly inspire people in a completely different way, in ways that I've personally been inspired.
Right.
And so for that, it's been these two projects that we've been talking about. I also put together a bunch of running trips.
Hut, run, hut.
And now I'm getting confused. No, it's hut, run, hut.
Hut, run, hut.
And bus, run, bus. So these are two.
You're kind of like running retreats, right? They're
kind of running retreats, running experiences. I'm still trying to find the right label for them. But they're small groups. This hut to hut running trip in Colorado goes from Aspen to a small town outside of Vail, and we stay at these secluded mountain huts, the 10th Mountain Huts, which I grew up in Colorado maintaining. When I was starting at 16 years old, I was going in doing trail maintenance for these huts, and we'd skied from hut to hut, and we'd biked from hut to hut, but there was never any trip that was a running from hut to hut. And so 6 or 7 years ago, I came up with this idea to do this, and vehicle assisted. So all you need is your backpack, a small running pack, and the ability to cover 15 to 20 miles a day, which I think is in most people's wheelhouse, and way more than people think. And so I've done, I think, 13 or 14 of those trips now. I usually do 2 or 3 a year, and getting to meet people and see people sort of transform during this week when your cell phone doesn't work, and you're really challenging yourself, and you're sleeping at 10,000, 11,000 feet with not a lot of oxygen. It's really quite exciting. And so it's kind of, for me, it's an opportunity to provide a little bit of my life and my philosophy for others. And, I don't make people get rid of their watches for the week, but I definitely suggest that they turn them off and not pay attention too much. Just, we're going to get there.
So if you had to articulate that philosophy, what is it?
Fun over fast. That's generally what I tell people. And that, I think that, what it is really just tapping into something way more primordial that we've lost touch with a little bit. This simple, coming up with a simple goal, and that's just to keep moving all day long. And then when we get there, we're going to eat and hang out and share some smiles. And
it is getting back to something really primal, and I think that speaks to another hunger and thirst that we have. People are more interested in having those kinds of experiences now than going to a fancy resort,
totally,
and laying on a beach.
Yeah.
How can I just feel more and feel more alive, right?
Totally.
And we're so accustomed to being in offices and riding elevators and things like that we've lost that connection.
Yeah.
And what's the bus run bus thing? It's kind of a different version of that?
It's a different version of that. So I've got some history I've got a lot of history of road trips and a little history of river rafting. And so I kind of consider it the combination of those two things. I, being a traveler for the past 20 plus years, have known about this bus company, Green Tortoise, out of San Francisco. They've been going since, I think, the early 1970s, 1973. The gentleman that started it converted a school bus and drove people from San Francisco to New York. And he did the first one in 4 or 5 days. And then the second one he did in 1 week. And then the third one he did in 3 weeks. And he realized that the longer he went, the more people he could get to sign up for it. And so now, whatever it is, 50 years later, he's his son and his grandson. His son owns it. His grandson is a driver, and they have a fleet of 5 buses, and they run trips all over the place, all over the American West, up to Alaska, sometimes down into Mexico. And I'd known about them, and I approached them and asked if they could charter a bus and do this trip. San Francisco, Yosemite, Zion, Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, Big Sur, and back to San Francisco in 7 days. And the guy's eyes just lit up, and he's like, that sounds amazing.
So basically you get a bunch of people, you sleep on the bus?
You sleep on the bus.
And you drive to a cool place, and you run around, and then you sleep, and then go somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the bus drives through the night. So it's kind of, I consider that kind of like time travel.
And you wake up in a new place every
You wake
day.
up in Yosemite, and you've got 10 hours to do a short run or 10 hours to do a long run, whatever it is that you feel comfortable with.
That's pretty cool.
So the first one was this past summer. And we did that route that I just mentioned. And I had 25, I think, runners on the bus, 2 bus drivers. We covered 1 mile shy of 2,000 miles. I think the stronger runners covered close to 140 miles throughout the course of the week, including like a 15-mile run in Las Vegas, hitting as many restaurants as they could for the 5 hours that we were there. And it was really phenomenal. It was living in the American West. We have so much at our fingertips. The issue is getting to all of them. And so solved that with 2 bus drivers and a bus load full of food and a bunch of like-minded people.
That's pretty cool.
So next summer I'm doing, I'll do 2 of those. I'm going to do one up in Alaska, which is really exciting. So we'll fly into Anchorage and fly out of Juneau. Yeah. And it'll be about 1,500 or 1,600 miles on the bus. And potential again of 100 to 150 miles running in all of those places through some of the most beautiful terrain in all of North America.
Have you been up to Alaska before?
I've gone up there 5 or 6 years in a row now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So I rode my motorcycle up there 6 years ago to complete.
That was when you rode your motorcycle all the way to Patagonia, right?
I rode my motorcycle to Patagonia when I was 23 years old from Colorado. I have this tendency, this need to do things a little bit differently. I'd gotten into a study abroad program in Valparaiso, Chile, in central Chile.
I've been there.
You have?
Well, my wife is from Alaska, but her mother is Chilean.
Okay.
From Santiago, but I've been to Valparaiso and then some of the coastal towns around there.
Yeah, it's incredibly beautiful. And so I'd gotten into this study abroad program and just living in or being in school in Boulder, Colorado for however many years you get the college students coming back and from their study abroad program and I was just kind of hearing the same stories over and over and over again. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do study abroad, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to ride my motorcycle there. And so this was a full 10 years later. I wanted to complete the 2 continents. So I rode my motorcycle up to Alaska and then ran the Mount Marathon race up there, which is part of the reason that I don't race all that much anymore. Is because that race I consider to be the best out of any race that I've ever done.
Really?
Pretty much in the world.
Why is that?
It's dangerous. It doesn't have a set course. It's extremely competitive. It's got a lot of history. There's equal emphasis on the men as there is on the women and on the juniors for that matter. And it's just it's an incredibly huge celebration of who we are as Americans and who we are as athletes. It's really something else.
That's cool.
And it all happens in 5 kilometers.
Nothing can match that, so you're just not...
It's hard. I don't know how to say it. It's hard. It's like I appreciate all of the races out there. I appreciate that there's these races, and I appreciate that that people have something on their calendar to train for and to look forward to. But after running up and down a mountain in Alaska, like the idea of training to run, this contrived route around a bunch of ski trails on a ski mountain, because that's the only place that we can get a permit to run a race here in the lower 48. It just doesn't do a whole lot for me.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm glad that they exist, but I need something substantive to kind of feed my desire to race.
Yeah, what's the point? I mean, there's always somebody doing something crazier too. Mm-hmm. Like, how many times can you run the Badwater course in a row, or
totally,
the 7 marathons on 7 continents? And these are expensive affairs. Mm-hmm. And your whole thing is like, that's great, but let's strip it away and find the meaning in all of this. And the meaning comes in those human connections that you have by just being in your backyard.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't need to be more complicated than
right.
that.
Yep.
One of the things we didn't talk about is the fact that you lived in Antarctica for a while.
Yeah.
It was a while ago, though, right? How old were you when you were there?
That was right when Liz and I started dating. So that was maybe 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky she's still in my life. I left frequently for several months at a time.
This is who you are.
Yeah. And so this was I had read which book. I mean, everyone that's been to Antarctica has one book that spoke to them more than the others. And for a lot of people, that book's Endurance, and other people, it's another book. And for me, it was this book called The Worst Journey in the World. And you would think that would have the opposite effect.
Right. Instead, this magnetizes you.
Completely. And so this was a journey in 1906 or 1907. And it was the Scott journey where he ended up going to the South Pole and dying on the way back. This was written by the youngest person on his team that stayed at camp. And so he was there in Antarctica for 2 years. I'm like, I gotta go.
2 years.
Yeah. And 2 very long winters. And so an ex-girlfriend of mine, her ex-boyfriend, worked in Antarctica, and I just asked him, like, how do I get a job there? And he says,
you can't just go. You can't just go to the South Pole.
Yeah, unless you got a lot of money. And then you still can't stay for that long. And so he's like, so what sort of skills do you have? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, carpentry? I'm like, nope. He's like, kitchen? I'm like, sorta. He's like, dishwashing? And I'm like, I can wash dishes. And so that's what I did. Wow. It's the hardest job I've ever gotten in terms of interviews and physicals and all of these things.
Wow.
But yeah, I got a job at the South Pole. I was on the first airplane to go there for that season. It was October 12th, must have been 2009 or 2010, and stuck around there for 4 months, washing dishes 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Ran 2 races while I was there. That was a huge part of the reason that I wanted to go. There's a race called the Race Around the World, which takes place on Christmas Day, ever since the 1970s. And it's a 2.5 mile race that goes around the station, and pretty much everybody participates, whether on foot or on snowmobile or on snow bikes or whatever it is. Some people tow couches behind the snowmobiles. It's just a parade around the station. It's an excuse for everybody to get out.
Didn't you create a new course though?
I did, yeah. And so when I arrived there, they were doing 3 laps, 3 3/4 mile laps around the station. And I'm like, but the station's so much bigger than that. Like, how come we don't go out to that, station or that building or out to the berms or out to those, the ice tunnels out there? And the woman that I asked about it, she handed me a map of the station and said, go ahead, design the course. And so I designed a new course there.
Just one broader
one big loop. And it was awesome. It went all around the station. Really cool.
Every time zone.
Yeah. And then the winner of that race, the award for the man and the women that win the race is that you get a free trip to the edge of the continent to McMurdo Station in order to compete in the marathon there, which is again only open to employees, and they usually get maybe 40 or 50 people to run it. And on the day before that we're supposed to fly to McMurdo, me and this gal, they canceled our flight. And it was
just weather.
No, it wasn't. It was bureaucracy. They didn't need any shipments to the South Pole or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So they just canceled the flight. Like, we're not a priority. The 2 skinny kitchen staff runners wanting to run the marathon on the coast was not enough of a priority. So we enlisted the help of a couple surveyors at the South Pole Station, and we designed our own marathon course there at the South Pole Station, which was, again, 1 lap of what we had done, about 2.5 miles, and then out to the ice runway, which is 2.5 miles long. And we did 5 laps up and down the ice runway for
just
hands
you
down.
And one woman?
We ended up getting, I think, 6 or 7 people started and 4 people ran the marathon. From what I've been told, it's still going to this day, and I think they get like 15 to 20 people competing in the marathon. For hands down, quite possibly the most boring marathon course in the world.
But definitely not the easiest.
No.
They should call it the Rickey Gates Marathon.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what are we looking at? Like -20? Like what is the temperature range?
It was, when I did that, it was about, the wind chill was -40, and that was going one direction. In the other direction, it was probably more like -60, because you're going with the wind and then against the wind.
How do you even gear up for that?
A lot of layers. Yeah, a whole lot of layers. I had big, just like these guys, big earphones plugged into what was back then an iPod. And I just remember this one funny part, like, and huge mittens with glove warmers in there. I had my iPod on album shuffle, and I can't remember which album it was, maybe his greatest hits, but Frank Sinatra's greatest hits coming on.
Oh my God.
And knowing
so now
that
for the rest of your life, if you hear Frank Sinatra, you're going to think of that experience, right?
Straight there. And it was just, I know that it was too cold for me to take the iPod out, because it would have frozen immediately, and then I would have been without any music. So I think I'm one of the few people that have listened to an entire Frank Sinatra album while running a marathon.
I don't know. There's probably a few others.
Yeah.
But I had Colin O'Brady in here sharing about his solo adventure across Antarctica, pulling that sled. Yeah. And he was saying that he had to be very careful about how he expended himself. Like, you have to create momentum to pull that sled. But if he overexerted himself or went too hard and started to sweat, like, sweat is death. Like, you can't sweat. No. So how do you run a marathon with all these layers on and avoid that death-defying pitfall? Yeah,
well, you can't run very fast, that's for sure. I think I ran 4:05, and there's no doubt about it. It's a delicate balance. His situation was vastly different than mine. If I went into death zone, then I just ran into the galley and got some hot chocolate.
Right.
He didn't have that opportunity.
Right. But as soon as you start sweating, it freezes immediately.
Totally.
Right?
And it was fascinating. Like, and that's when I experienced it the most, was during that marathon, was taking my jacket off, and there was actual like snow. It's called hoar, HOAR, inside your jacket, just all of this frozen moisture. And it's not something that you want to happen if you're out there for multiple days, or even like a really long day. Yeah, it's deadly.
So what was the idea going to Antarctica? Like, what were you trying to learn? And did that experience satisfy that? Totally.
It was two different things. I think that there's no place on Earth that's more like a different planet than Antarctica. So for me, it was like, if I wanted to ever go to space, this was my opportunity to go to space. And then the other part is meeting and talking to all of the people there that were equally as interested in going to this other planet as me. It's just kind of funny. It seems like everybody goes down there with a copy of Dune. And then when you get there, it feels very much like this desert, like it's the driest place on Earth. It's 10,000 feet. The South Pole's at 10,000 feet. It's pancake flat. There's like, without the stations there, you're like, human beings can't exist. There's no life form at the South Pole with the exception of humans. Yeah. I remember we got our fruits and vegetables in from New Zealand at one point, and there was a ladybug in the lettuce. And the ladybug went straight into a jar, and it was the station pet for the next 3 months. It was incredible. Wow. Yeah. And everybody visited the ladybug that was down in a little greenhouse. But it's just an interesting assortment of people. You get a lot of people like myself who are travelers and they want to visit the world. You get some old, crusty Antarctica people that are, lifelong employees to the program. And then you get a few blue-collar people as well, working for the contract company. Back then it was Raytheon. Back then it was Raytheon, and now I don't know if this is still current day, but it's Halliburton now. So
Is
huge.
it really? What are they studying down there?
They're studying things very, very big and very, very small. So they're studying neutrinos. This is the Ice Cube program. And so this is a really amazing scientific experiment where they've drilled 80 or so holes into the ice plateau and put these little detectors, DOMs, into the ice that can actually detect when a neutrino collides with the nucleus of an atom and creates a small explosion.
Whoa.
And so that's the things that are really, really small. So these are, they're actually capturing this explosion. The neutrino goes through the planet Earth and then collides on the opposite side. So that's how small they are.
Wow.
Yeah, it's hard for me to really comprehend this.
I can't even begin to understand what that's about. But.
And I had like several different people dumb that down for me in a lot of different ways, and that's the best way that I understood that. And so then they've also got some incredible telescopes looking deep into outer space for dark matter, and then it being the cleanest air, supposedly the cleanest air on planet Earth. They also study air quality. NOAA is there with a station.
Wow. The stars at night had to be unbelievable.
So when I was there for the summertime. I watched the sun revolve around in the sky for 4 months straight.
Right.
I
darkness.
never saw the darkness.
How does that fuck with you?
I had a room with no windows in it, and I simply put it into my head that when I was going into my room, it was nighttime.
Yeah. So you'd stick to a schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow, man. Also, don't they like drill these ice cores and pull them out, and they're like time machines, right? Because they're so layered.
Yeah,
like
you're
a tree,
going
like the rings of a tree. Like you can go back in time. And
170,000 years is how
Right.
far you're going back when you're going that far deep into the ice, and so you're looking at volcanic explosions.
Right.
Yeah. It's really incredible.
One of the things I was reading about was with the receding water levels and the melting of the ice caps is that it starts to expose like this water and ultimately vapor from so long ago, and they don't know what's in that. Like there could be viruses and bacteria that haven't been on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years.
Totally.
That could create all kinds of strange sci-fi movies type situations.
Yeah.
That's a trip though, man.
Yeah.
So how do you, now you're married, you're working on these books, but you're a creature of wanderlust. Like what's next, and how do you satisfy that itch, and what are you looking at now?
I'm still coming up with more projects. The project that I have right now that I'm most excited about, which is going to take me a couple years, at least 2 years, I'm calling the 50 Classic Trails of North America. And this is kind of purely up to me. This is sort of based off of a book from the 1970s called The 50 Classic Climbing Ascents of North America. And where these two rock climbers went around Canada, Mexico, United States, and found these just totally iconic rock climbs, some of which have only been done one time. So for me, this is, I want it to be a little bit more attainable to the general public, but I do want it to be something that a runner can strive for. So the parameters for this are that I can tell somebody with confidence that this trail is worth traveling to and making a weekend or a week out of it. Another parameter is that it needs to be done in 24 hours by the fastest runners or hikers. I'm tentative about calling it a running specific book. And then that it really covers all ecosystems. So I'm not going to go through all 50 of them, but just a few of them. There's a couple obvious ones. The rim to rim to rim in the Grand Canyon is an all-time classic and needs to be included. The Lost Coast in Northern California, 50 mile point-to-point run through the most uninterrupted coastline in the lower 48. The one that I've done most recently up in Alaska, the Chilkoot Trail, going from Skagway up into British Columbia, which was used for a couple years for the gold rush to get people into the Yukon. But then they built a railroad which bypassed it. But it's a 32 mile or 34 mile point to point run, which goes from this incredible coastal jungle, essentially, up into this high country and then down into a much more arid Canadian landscape. So the idea is to kind of a few different things, look at a bunch of different ecosystems, provide people with hopefully some inspiration to check out some new terrain, illuminate some human history. Ideally, there's a bit of human history with each of these trails, and really provide something. I call it running beyond the bib, providing people with inspiration to do a trail that's not necessarily a race,
Right.
and to give them a goal that isn't necessarily an FKT or a record, but something that they can look at and feel like they can accomplish.
And this is a book that you're doing.
It'll be book,
Like an art book, like visual, very visual.
totally.
And
Yeah. So this will be book, website, and ideally 1 minute long per trail, little video
Videos.
segments. Yeah.
Like Atlas Obscura for trail
Yeah,
running.
totally. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
pretty cool. I like that.
I got to get that guy to help illustrate. I like his illustrations.
You have a lot going on. You have, like it's cool. I think what I really connect with about what you're about is the sharing part, like how you're taking this thing that you love and creating like tactile objects and inspiring people to, infuse their lives with the things that have brought so much meaning to you. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. It's, I hope that it reaches people out there. I know that I constantly need, the things in my life to evolve, and I don't need to change those things necessarily, or like switch out running for whatever, skydiving or something. But I do need for it to evolve to help me with who I am today and who I'm becoming tomorrow.
Well, cool, man. I think that's a good place to end it. Super amazing. Thank you for sharing today. Transamericana coming to a film festival near you and hopefully a digital platform at some point. I was very moved by it. You guys did an amazing job on that movie. So congratulations on that. I can't wait for people to see it and enjoy it.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
And what's the book going to be called?
The book is going to be called Cross Country, and it's being published by Chronicle Books out of San Francisco, and that'll also be out in April.
In April. Cool. And RickeyGates.com.
Yeah.
Definitely go to his website. Like it's a cool experience to just get lost in all the content there. It's very cool. And you're an easy guy to find on social media too. Amazing photographer as well. So definitely subscribe to your Instagram page, Rickey Gates, as well. Awesome. Anything else?
That's about it. I hope to share the trails with people. Hut run hut, bus run bus. I love providing these experiences and sharing them with others. So
cool, man.
Yeah.
I want to go on one of those trips.
Please do. Yeah. You and I have a mutual friend, Heidi Zuckerman.
Oh, Heidi. That's right, from Aspen.
Totally.
Oh my goodness.
And she was interested in a hut run hut, and I'm still working on her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go irrespective, but if Heidi's going, I would love to be able to join her at the same time. That would be really fun.
Yeah.
She just left the museum in Aspen, didn't she?
She did.
She go back to New York?
I don't know where she's gone, but I think she's. I don't doubt that there's a little bit of finding herself right now. That's must be very exciting. She was at the Aspen Art Museum for 14 years
for a long time.
And created a really incredible program there. New building. It's. I can say this as a person that was born and raised in Aspen. That like her impact has changed the face of the town for the better, and deeply cultural.
Yeah, she's a very cool person. So, hey, Heidi, I'm sure you're listening. She might be listening. Anyway, cool, man. Well, to be continued. And again, I just want to extend an invite for you to come back and talk about the book when that's coming out. And maybe we can go on a run that time too.
Awesome.
All right?
Sounds great.
All right,
Thanks so much,
Ricky.
Rich.
Good talking to you. Peace. Running. How beautiful and awesome is that human being? I love that guy. I adore that conversation. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please hit up Ricky on the socials and let him know directly what you thought of today's conversation. He's at Rickey Gates on Twitter and on Instagram. And please be sure to check out the show notes on the episode page to learn more. And please, please pre-order his book, Cross Country, at rickygates.com. Quick final reminder, just a few days remain until January 31st to take advantage of our special discount on the Plant Power Meal Planner, $20 off the annual $100 fee when you visit meals.richroll.com and enter promo code POWER20 at checkout. If you'd like to support the work we do here on the show, subscribe, rate, and comment on it on Apple Podcasts. Share the show on social media and with your friends. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button on Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to the program. And you can support us on Patreon at richroll.com/donate. I appreciate all the hard work that my team puts into putting on the show every week. Jason Camiello for audio engineering, production, show notes, and interstitial music. Blake Curtis and Margot Lubin for videoing and editing the visual version of the program. Jessica Miranda for graphics. Ali Rogers for portraits. DK for advertiser relationships. And theme music by Anna Lemma. Appreciate all you guys. I don't take your attention for granted. I am here only because of you guys. So I'll see you back here next week with Chef Ileana Regan. It's a beautiful conversation. I think you guys are going to enjoy it, and I'll take you out with a clip. Until then, peace, plants, namaste.
That is what I do, and that's what I love to do, and it's expression of myself, and I love cooking, and, but it's really more than that, because I love the storytelling of the cooking, like gathering our ingredients and growing things. And that's a big part of where we're going with our property in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, is to make it just feel a little bit more holistic. And I just want to feel, I guess, better about it. And I think that a lot of people look at like chefs and my industry as being kind of glamorous, but it doesn't feel like that, at least not for me, not on a daily basis.